I've seen houses burn, cars flipped, and people fighting over scraps of pride, but nothing prepared me for the morning I watched a bulldozer crawl toward my home like a metal beast hungry for destruction. The strange part? I didn't hear it first. I felt it, the vibration traveling through the quiet street, rattling the stillness of a neighborhood that loved to pretend it was perfect. It was 7:12 a.m. The breeze was cool, carrying the smell of wet grass and the distant chirping of birds. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft oranges and thin gold streaks. Normally, this hour felt peaceful, but that day, the air tasted different, metallic, uneasy, wrong. I stepped outside with my coffee, expecting their usual passive-aggressive HOA patrol car moving slowly down the street. Instead, I saw a construction crew in bright vests, helmets glinting under the sun, standing around my front yard. And then I saw the bulldozer. Yellow. Massive. Engine humming like a threat. My house, the one I built with the last memory of my late father's blueprints, had orange spray-painted marks on the walls. As if someone had already decided it no longer belonged to me. I froze. The lead worker glanced at me, surprised but not guilty, which meant one thing: someone told them this was legal. My heartbeat slowed, not sped up. Years as a police officer had trained me well. Shock moved through me quietly, like cold water instead of fire. "Morning," the crew chief said casually, nodding toward my house. "We were told to begin demolition at 8. Demolition. Of my house. Without notice. Without warning." A woman in a crisp blue blazer stood across the street, clipboard in hand, smirking as if this was a show she'd bought front-row tickets for. HOA President, Cynthia Hale. Our eyes met. She didn't look away. She didn't even blink. That's when I felt it, a flicker of something sharp and cold behind her expression. Something calculated. My house wasn't an accident. This was a message. I stepped forward slowly, setting my coffee cup on the hood of my truck, the quiet morning crackling with tension. "Who approved this?" I asked calmly. Cynthia smiled. Like she'd been waiting for that question. "We did," she said. "And you can't stop it." The bulldozer's engine growled. Something inside me grew still, very still. This wasn't just conflict. This was war, and they didn't know who they'd just picked a fight with. Before all this, before bulldozers, threats, and legal chess, our neighborhood felt like the kind of place people wrote real estate dreams about. Maplewood Ridge. A quiet, tree-lined community tucked between rolling hills and a slow river. Families walking dogs at dusk, porch lights glowing like soft lanterns, and neighbors waving from driveways as if everyone lived inside a postcard. When I first moved in, 5 years earlier, I was simply Ethan Cole, a police officer looking for stability after too many shifts filled with chaos. I didn't advertise my badge. I didn't correct people when they assumed I worked construction or maintenance. I liked blending in, knowing people for who they were when they weren't trying to impress or fear the law. My house was special. Not big. Not flashy. But personal. My father was an architect, stubborn, brilliant, and loyal to a fault. Before he passed, he handed me hand-drawn blueprints of a small craftsman-style home he designed for when you're ready to settle down. I built that home piece by piece, weekend after weekend, stubbornly following every line on those papers like sacred scripture. Even the porch swing was his idea. So when I moved to Maplewood Ridge, that house wasn't just wood and nails. It was memory. Legacy. Peace. Life here used to be simple. My next-door neighbor, Old Man Fletcher, spent his mornings watering his lawn, waving at every car like they were all relatives. His wife baked pies on Sundays, always two, one for us, one for whoever needs sweetness more than we do, she'd say. Across the street lived the Martins, a young couple with 2 toddlers who thought I was a superhero because I once carried their runaway trampoline back during a storm. And then there was Cynthia. Cynthia Hale, HOA president. Sharp suits, colder eyes, and a smile that never reached them. She carried herself like she'd inherited the neighborhood, like the sidewalks, fences, and birdsong all belonged to her authority. She loved power disguised as community care. In the early days, she was polite enough. Too polite. Always hovering near my property, asking pointed questions. Planning any major changes to the house. You're sure your fence meets the regulation height? Do you intend to host gatherings? We discourage noise here. Everything she said sounded like it came with an invisible fine attached. I ignored most of it. I followed the rules. I paid dues on time. I stayed off the radar. For a while, she backed off. The first crack in the piece, it began with a letter. The kind written in overly formal language that pretended to be polite but dripped with accusation. HOA notice, unregistered vehicles on property. It wasn't true. My truck was registered, insured, and parked exactly where it always was. When I confronted Cynthia, she dismissed it with a wave. Oh, clerical error. Mistakes happen, she said, though her expression said otherwise. A week later, HOA notice, violation, yard not meeting aesthetic standards. Again, false. I kept my property clean, cleaner than most. Another week, HOA notice, report of loud noise after 10 p.m. I wasn't even home that night. Letters turned into visits. Visits turned into thinly veiled threats. Some neighbors are complaining, she'd say. About what? I'd ask. Oh, just, things. She enjoyed the vagueness. It gave her control. But I refused to take the bait. My job taught me the difference between escalation and patience. So I stayed calm, steady, polite. Which only made her worse. Small whispers began blowing through the neighborhood. People said Cynthia wanted to revamp the area. To attract a higher class of buyers. She convinced the HOA board to start pushing out homeowners who didn't fit her image. It wasn't just me. The Martins received fines for toys in their yard. The Fletchers were warned about their unsightly garden gnomes. A widow down the street was told her house needed a repaint, even though the paint was barely a year old. Slow pressure. Quiet intimidation. A campaign dressed as care. But I noticed something else. Cynthia kept meeting with people who weren't residents, men in suits walking the streets, pointing at empty lots, whispering with her near the community office. Then came the day I saw a surveyor. He was standing in my backyard, measuring property lines. Can I help you? I asked. He flinched. Checked a clipboard. Said awkwardly, HOA requested updated boundary surveys. For my property? He shrugged. That's what they gave me. He left quickly, like a man who realized he'd walked into something he shouldn't be part of. That's when unease began spreading through me like slow frost. Something wasn't right. Something deep, hidden, organized. Over the months, a strange shift happened. Houses around us sold, fast. Families disappeared almost overnight. Their "for sale" signs were replaced within days. Rumors swirled about a developer interested in turning parts of Maplewood Ridge into modern luxury townhomes. But official HOA newsletters never mentioned it. One late afternoon, while watching the sun sink behind the maple trees, my neighbor Fletcher walked over, leaning on his cane, looking uneasy. You ever feel like someone's rewriting the neighborhood while we sleep? He asked softly. I nodded. Feels like something's happening behind the curtains. He stared at my house, then back at me. Cynthia's been asking about your land. My land? He lowered his voice. Says it doesn't properly align with the HOA zoning map. Says it may qualify for reclamation. Whatever that means. Reclamation. The word hit me like a slow punch. My property was perfectly legal. Everything was registered, approved, surveyed. So why was she suddenly interested? The signs kept coming. I found a fresh stake in the far corner of my backyard, bright orange ribbon tied to it. The next week, a certified letter arrived, HOA request for property review. Inside, vague language hinted at non-compliant structure placement, referencing a map I had never seen before. Then another surveyor showed up. Then a committee member knocked on my door at 8 p.m., asking questions about my house's original permits. Piece by piece, something big was forming. Something they thought I wouldn't notice until too late. Yet through it all, I stayed calm. I kept my routine, morning runs, evening porch sitting, helping neighbors with small chores. People whispered that I seemed too relaxed for someone being targeted. But that was the point. When someone pushes you without knowing who you are, without knowing what training you've had, without knowing the patience you carry like a shield, you don't react with fire. You wait. Because I wasn't just Ethan, the quiet homeowner they thought they could bully. I was Officer Ethan Cole, trained investigator, observer, and someone who never made a move without knowing the truth behind the curtain. And the curtain was about to be pulled back. The disturbance that sealed everything one night, just past midnight, I stepped out to lock my truck and noticed a faint light in my backyard. A flashlight. Moving slowly. Someone was back there. I approached quietly, boots silent on the grass. Through the slats of the fence, I saw Cynthia, in a hoodie, holding a map, shining her light at my home's foundation. Whispering to someone on the phone. "No, the owner won't see it coming," she said. "I already have the board's vote. Once the demolition order is filed, he's done. The land is worth more than the house anyway." My breath stilled. Demolition order. So this wasn't harassment. It wasn't intimidation. It wasn't coincidence. It was a plan. A calculated, premeditated move to take my land, probably part of a bigger deal with the developers. She turned suddenly, and I stepped back, staying hidden behind the shadow of a tree until she left. When she was gone, I stood there a while, in the cool silence, the moon casting pale silver across my yard. There was no anger. No rage. Just a quiet shift inside me. A decision. A promise. A calm vow whispered to myself, I won't fight in anger, I'll wait. And when the right moment came, I'd make sure they never tried something like this with anyone ever again. The morning after I overheard Cynthia whispering in my backyard, something in me shifted, not fear, not panic, but a kind of sharpened clarity. The kind you feel right before making an arrest, steady breathing, steady pulse, steady mind. Years on the force had taught me that when people plot in the dark, they always leave a trail in the light. You just have to know where to look. I woke up early, before sunrise, sitting on the porch swing my father designed. The wood creaked softly under me as I watched the sky slowly melt from deep navy to pale blue. I thought about the surveyors, the letters, the sudden property complaints. How every rumor pointed toward a redevelopment plan. How neighbors had started disappearing. And how Cynthia had said, with her voice cold and sure, the owner won't see it coming. She truly believed I was blind. She truly believed I would break quietly. That was her first mistake. I started with the HOA newsletters, those glossy, relentless pamphlets Cynthia loved to parade around. I had kept every single one since moving in. I dug them out of a drawer, spread them across my dining table, and began scanning for patterns. 2 years ago, the newsletters were full of community events, recycling tips, barbecue photos, and holiday decoration contests. Then, slowly, the tone shifted. 6 months ago, community improvements under review. Vague. No specifics. 4 months ago, potential modernization zone study. Still unclear. No map included. 2 months ago, long-term neighborhood value initiative. Basically corporate talk for, we're planning something big but won't tell you. But one line in a recent newsletter stood out like a flashing red beacon: some properties may be subject to reassessment under updated HOA zoning and value preservation guidelines. Value preservation. Cynthia's favorite phrase for evicting the people she didn't like. But reassessment? By whose authority? HOAs couldn't simply redraw property lines. They didn't have that power. Unless someone forged documents, or made unofficial agreements, or pushed the board into signing things they didn't understand. And that meant the truth wasn't just buried, it was intentionally hidden. Later that morning, I crossed the street to speak with Mr. Fletcher. His garden bloomed with late spring flowers, marigolds, violets, and roses he tended to like they were his children. But the old man seemed distracted, his brows drawn tight, his cane tapping anxiously on the stone path. "You heard the noise yesterday?" I asked. He sighed. "Hard to miss. Looked like a construction company preparing for something. Something meant for my house." He stopped tapping the cane. His expression softened with the heaviness of someone carrying a secret too long. "Ethan, you need to know something." I waited. He took off his hat, a gesture he only did when discussing serious matters. "A few weeks back, Cynthia asked me to sign a petition. Something about eliminating non-compliant lots. I refused. She pressured me harder than she ever has. Said the neighborhood needed alignment, and that some older homes weren't up to standard. My home. All signs pointed to yours," he whispered. "But there's more." He lowered his voice further. "She told me developers were offering the HOA a substantial investment package if they could guarantee certain parcels of land. Your parcel," she said, "was the key piece." My jaw tightened. She said that? Her words. There it was, the missing puzzle piece. Developers. Land. A lucrative deal that promised money, prestige, and power. And my property, because it sat on the ridge overlooking the river, was the crown jewel. No wonder they wanted it gone. No wonder Cynthia didn't blink while signing off on false violations. No wonder surveyors quietly crept in at night. My home wasn't a target of harassment. It was a target of profit. After leaving Fletcher's porch, I drove straight to the county records office, a beige building with flickering lights and a clerk who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I flashed my badge only when necessary, not for intimidation, but because it sped up any process involving paperwork. "Maplewood Ridge," I said. "Property records. All parcels." She narrowed her eyes. "HOA request." "No. Personal." That changed her whole posture. She typed quickly, then handed me a stack of files thicker than my wrist. I spent nearly 4 hours cross-checking maps, deeds, easements, and zoning codes. My house was placed exactly where it should be. The foundation matched original survey data. My land boundaries hadn't changed since my father bought the plot decades ago. But then I found it, buried in a supplemental zoning folder. Printed 3 months earlier. Stamped HOA preliminary draft, do not distribute. My parcel. The boundary line was shifted. Moved inward. Shrunk by nearly 30 feet on the east side. 30 feet, the exact width needed for a shared access road for the proposed development. One detail chilled me, the signature at the bottom. But the signature beside hers, it was supposed to belong to the vice president of the HOA board. I recognized the name, Daniel Brooks. A man who rarely attended meetings and avoided conflict like it was contagious. But there was something wrong. The signature didn't match his handwriting. Not even close. Forged. Cold anger, the controlled kind, spread through my chest. This wasn't just scheming. This was fraud. Legal fraud. Criminal fraud. And if she filed a demolition request using that altered map, She was counting on the county processing the paperwork before anyone noticed. Counting on homeowners not understanding legal language. Counting on silence. People like her always thought silence meant weakness. It didn't. Sometimes silence meant planning. That evening, I attended the HOA meeting. It was held in the small community center, a beige room with folding chairs, stale coffee, and too many pamphlets. Residents sat scattered around the room, tension floating thick in the air. Cynthia stood at the front, her hair in a perfect twist, a satisfied gleam in her eyes. She acted like she owned the place. Which, in her mind, she did. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We have a few updates about property value improvements." I stood near the back, arms crossed, eyes steady. She continued. "We've completed surveys for the modernization plan, and the HOA will be taking action on non-compliant structures." "Which ones?" I asked, my voice calm but loud enough. The room turned. Cynthia's smile tightened. "Ethan, I believe you received the notice." "I received many notices." I stepped forward. "But none explaining why my home is suddenly a problem after 5 years of perfect compliance." Murmurs broke out. Neighbors turned to one another in confusion. Some looked fearful, others angry. Cynthia raised a hand, forcing quiet. "We're simply aligning the neighborhood to future development standards. Your property falls under a zone marked for redesign." "According to a map you drafted privately," I said, pulling the printed document from my jacket. "And according to a signature that doesn't belong to Mr. Brooks." Gasps. The kind that ripple through a room like a shockwave. Cynthia's face paled, just slightly, before she regained control. "That map is preliminary. It means nothing yet." "Then why did you file a demolition request?" Silence. Heavy. Thick. Suffocating. She didn't answer, but I saw the truth flicker in her eyes. She thought she had already won. She thought the process was unstoppable. She thought I was confronting her out of panic. But she didn't understand something crucial. I already knew everything. 2 days later, while walking my property at dusk, I noticed something strange: small boundary flags placed behind my shed. Brighter, newer, cleaner. Someone had been back again. I followed the flags, all the way to the far corner of my yard, where I found the edge of a fresh blueprint tucked under a rock. A blueprint showing phase 1 of a planned development. Road access. Paving. Removal of old structures. My old structure. My home was labeled, demolition required. And next to it, in small print, approved by HOA president. But the most chilling detail? The projected development timeline listed yesterday's date, for the start of demolition. Meaning the bulldozer wasn't an accident. It wasn't early. It was right on schedule. They expected me not to notice. Not to question. Not to resist. And that's when I realized the full betrayal. The entire board, or at least those under Cynthia's thumb, had signed off on the plan quietly. Behind closed doors. In private meetings. Over dinners and informal gatherings. Neighbors who were friendly became complicit through silence. People who once waved now looked away. Because they all thought my home would be gone soon. They thought the sheriff's office, which oversaw our county, wouldn't interfere. They didn't know I was a cop. They didn't know I had access to resources, knowledge, and training that made their plan look like a child's game. They didn't know I could read a forged signature in 5 seconds. They didn't know I could track paper trails like footprints in fresh snow. They didn't know I could stay patient, waiting for the exact moment to strike back. That night, standing in my backyard under the glow of the porch light my father once touched, I made a decision. Not in anger. Not in fear. But in absolute clarity. They wanted my home. They wanted my land. They wanted to erase my father's memory. I wouldn't let them. And as the cool night breeze brushed against my skin, carrying the faint echo of the bulldozer from the morning, I whispered the vow again, stronger this time, I won't fight in anger. I'll wait. Because justice doesn't rush. Justice prepares. Justice watches. Justice arrives exactly when the guilty think they're safe. There's a moment in every investigation where everything goes quiet. Not silent, quiet. The kind of quiet that exists right before a storm reshapes the world. That's where I was. My home marked for demolition. My land redrawn illegally. My neighbors misled. My rights erased on forged paper. But instead of panic, a strange calm settled in. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who the enemy is, and exactly how to take them down. Phase 1, the blueprint of their scheme. I began at my dining table again, except this time, it wasn't newsletters spread out, it was evidence. The forged map. The blueprint found behind my shed. A pile of letters from the HOA. Digital photos of the boundary stakes. Notes from Fletcher. Screenshots of the HOA's website showing subtle edited guidelines. Records from the county office. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed, this time with clarity so sharp it almost glowed. Cynthia wasn't just changing maps. She was orchestrating a full-scale land grab, forge signatures. Submit new zoning. Push out undesirable homes. Approve demolitions quietly. Sell the land to the developer for huge profit. Claim it was, for the community. Every step was precise. Calculated. Arrogant. She thought nobody in Maplewood Ridge could detect fraud. She thought nobody would read legal codes. She thought nobody would ever dig deep enough. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that the quiet man on the hill was a police officer with a specialty in property fraud, contract disputes, and permit violations. I didn't flaunt it. Most people didn't know. But the job had taught me exactly how people like Cynthia operated. And exactly how to expose them. Phase 2, late night recon. Every night that week, I left the lights off and walked the perimeter of my yard with a flashlight pointed downward, not outward. I wasn't looking for intruders anymore. I was looking for patterns. Fresh footprints. Brand new flags. Tape markers. Spray paint on the soil. Small stakes hammered deep where no surveyor had any legit reason to be. By night 3, I found something much bigger, a plastic evidence bag half buried behind the property line, containing a copy of a contract labeled, Maple Ridge Redevelopment, Phase 1 Acquisition Agreement. And inside, the names of the properties targeted first. Mine was circled. Someone must have dropped it during their late-night trespassing. That contract wasn't supposed to exist yet. Which meant the developer and the HOA had already moved far beyond planning. This was execution. Still, I didn't move. Didn't react. Not yet. Phase 3, following the digital trail. On the 4th night, I opened my laptop and accessed public and semi-public portals, county permit database, HOA board reports, real estate development proposals, county meeting transcripts, contractor license records, corporate filings. Then I found it. A quiet entry in the county's permit request list, request hashtag 49217D, emergency demolition, unsafe structure, filed by, Maplewood Ridge HOA property, my address filed 2 weeks earlier. 2 weeks. While they were smiling at me in meetings, pretending the letters were routine, they had already submitted a demolition order behind my back. But the real blow came when I saw the attached justification, structural instability observed due to non-compliant construction. That line was a lie. A measurable one. I scrolled further. There was an inspection report uploaded with the request. Signed by a man named Clark Harmon. I knew the name. A private inspector who'd been caught twice falsifying reports. He'd lost state certification once but got it back through a loophole. Cynthia had hired him. Of course she had. I printed every document, timestamp, and entry. Then I backed everything up on multiple drives. Because this wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy. And I was building a case. Phase 4, quiet interviews. The next step was subtle. I started checking on neighbors individually, one by one, not as a cop, but as a friend. Some were afraid to talk. Some whispered. Some broke the moment they realized someone finally cared enough to ask questions. Mrs. Fletcher cried as she showed me a letter threatening legal action if she didn't remove her rose trellis, the one her late husband built 20 years earlier. The Martins admitted they'd been fined for clutter because their kids' bicycles were left leaning against the house. A single mom, Tara from the corner house, confessed the HOA threatened eviction if she didn't repaint her house within 14 days, even though the paint was barely a year old. This neighborhood doesn't feel like home anymore, she whispered. It feels like a trap. They weren't wrong. And Cynthia? She used fear as currency. But fear is weak against someone who knows the law better than she does. Phase 5, legal chess. I scheduled a meeting with an old friend, Eric Nolan, a real estate attorney with a mind like a razor. He leaned back in his chair, scanning the documents I brought. Cynthia forged board signatures, he murmured. Yes. Altered zoning maps. Correct. Filed fraudulent demolition paperwork. Yep. He exhaled, long and impressed. Ethan, this isn't an HOA dispute. This is a criminal case waiting to explode. Good, I said calmly. I want it to explode. He grinned. You always did like the quiet justice. We began crafting a strategic assault, not with emotion, but with law. Eric drafted cease and desist letters. Prepared an emergency injunction. Filed a request for investigation into permit fraud. Compiled evidence for county prosecutors. Drafted a civil suit for personal damages. Our weapon wasn't anger. It was precision. A scalpel. And Cynthia had no idea it was aimed at her throat. Phase 6, watching the board split. The next HOA meeting arrived. I didn't speak. I didn't raise a single concern. I sat quietly in the back, arms folded, watching the board members twitch with discomfort when they saw me. They knew something was off. They could feel pressure building, even though they didn't know where from. When Cynthia mentioned finalizing modernization steps, I watched the treasurer flinch. The secretary's foot tapped nervously. The vice president looked pale and avoided eye contact. The board wasn't unified. Cracks were showing. Fear was spreading. Good. Fear makes the guilty sloppy. Phase 7, the county visit. 2 days later, 2 county investigators arrived, responding to Eric's filings. They inspected my property thoroughly, took notes, photographed everything. When they finished, one of them shook his head. There is absolutely nothing unsafe about this structure, he said flatly. No grounds for demolition. None. The second investigator added quietly, whoever filed that request committed serious fraud. Cynthia didn't know yet. She thought her demolition was still moving forward. The bulldozer scheduled. The contractor ready. The plan airtight. But the county had just signed the first nail in her coffin. Phase 8, the final preparation. That night, I turned off every light in the house and stood in the darkness, looking out the window as the moon lit the quiet neighborhood. I knew what tomorrow would bring. The demolition crew would return. Cynthia would appear with that cold smile. The HOA board would pretend they were innocent. They thought they controlled the story. But they had no idea how much evidence I had stacked against them. No idea who I had already contacted. No idea who was waiting nearby to witness everything. Let them come, I whispered. This wasn't a battle of fists. It wasn't violence or vengeance. It was truth. And tomorrow, that truth would unfold like a blade of light through their carefully crafted lies. I checked the files one last time. Fraudulent maps, forged signatures, altered zoning documents, fake inspection report, permit falsifications, property invasion, evidence, witness statements, attorney filings, county response. Everything was ready. Everything was aligned. Everything was waiting. I sat on my porch swing as the first hint of dawn painted the sky. Calm. Still. Breathing slowly. They have no idea what's coming, I whispered to myself. And for the first time since this began, I almost felt sorry for them. When the dust finally settled, both literally and emotionally, I found myself standing in front of what remained of my home. The bulldozer scars were still visible on the ground, but strangely, they no longer hurt the way they once did. Maybe it was because I knew those marks weren't symbols of destruction anymore, they were evidence. Proof. A narrative carved into the earth that led to justice, not loss. The court had awarded me full restoration costs, punitive damages, and the right to rebuild exactly what the HOA tried to erase. The bulldozer operator had testified. Emails were exposed. The president resigned. The board dissolved. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now walked over to shake my hand, offering apologies for staying silent, admitting they'd been afraid of the same retaliation. But I didn't blame them. Fear can make even good people quiet. I spent the next few weeks in a gentle kind of stillness. No legal battles. No paperwork. No investigating. No late-night digging through records. Just quiet. The kind of quiet you don't realize you've been missing until you're sitting inside it. In that calm, I rebuilt slowly, not just the house, but my sense of trust in the world. Every morning, I walked the property line, not to guard it, but to honor it. The land felt different now. Lighter. Freed from false claims and forged maps. When the new foundation was laid, I stood there for a long time, watching concrete spread across the ground like a new beginning. And for the first time since everything had started, I felt something like peace wash over me. The peace of knowing I fought back the right way. Not with anger. Not with shouting. Not with the same destructive force they tried to use on me. But with patience. With intelligence. With the law, the thing I vowed to uphold the day I became a cop. People often assume justice is loud, flashing lights, raised voices, slamming fists. But in reality, real justice is quiet. It walks on steady feet. It doesn't rush. It doesn't tremble. And when it arrives, it does so with the gentlest, most devastating finality. A few months later, my new house stood exactly where the old one had been. Better. Stronger. Built with a story written into its frame, not a story of destruction, but of resurrection. I invited the neighbors for a small gathering on the porch. Nothing fancy, just lemonade, plastic chairs, and a simple sunset. People talked. Laughed. The community that had been fractured slowly began to stitch itself back together. Not because of the lawsuit, but because truth has this strange way of realigning the world. Before the night ended, I walked to the edge of my yard and looked out across the street where the former HOA office once operated. Empty now. Hollow. A reminder that power built on lies eventually collapses under its own weight. As the sky turned from gold to blue, I thought about everything that happened, the letters, the threats, the graffiti, the bulldozer tracks. And yet, despite all of it, I felt grateful in a strange, quiet way. If life never tested you, how would you know what you're capable of? If no one tried to break you, how would you learn what parts of you can't be broken? In that moment, I understood something simple but profound. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. Peace is standing in the ruins of something meant to destroy you, and realizing you're still whole. And with that thought, I stepped back onto my porch, listening to the soft hum of conversation, the sound of laughter returning to a neighborhood that had forgotten what it felt like. The storm had passed. The air was clear again. And so was I. I took a slow sip of my lemonade, breathed in the cool evening air, and whispered the final truth of my journey: justice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be right. If you enjoyed this story where justice wins without violence, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more cinematic HOA stories to life.